It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Phil. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Phil. This is the program that's all about the good stuff going on at the University of Louisville. So on the show today, what do parents know about how to keep their young children safe through vaccinations, keeping guns locked up, car seats, correct sleeping positions? And are pediatricians doing a good enough job reminding parents of these safety guidelines? We'll talk about a national survey in our Better Health Together segment, sponsored by Passport Health Plans. But first, some U of L researchers are working on a possible cancer vaccine. That's right, a way to prevent cancer. John Eaton, Kavitha, Yaddanapudi, and Chi Lee are all with the U of L School of Medicine, and they're here to talk about this project they've been working on for, I don't know, several years now, right? How long have you guys been working on it?
Long time.
Long time. Well, welcome to the show, first off.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks, Mark.
Cancer vaccine. Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, John, talk about it. Tell us
The
what
basis is very simple. It has to do with the similarity in between embryonic stem cells and tumor cells. These things both will grow as balls in the body, and they make a new circulation. The human stem cell does when it gets impregnated. And the most important point is that both the stem cells and the tumor cells produce things that are only made by embryos and not adults. And that means that these things are immunogenic.
Okay. Well, I'm going to back you up just a little bit. So What kinds of cancers are you hoping that you can come up with a vaccine for?
Right now, this is mostly solid tumors.
Solid
Lung
tumors
cancer,
of what? Lung cancer? What else?
Breast cancer, ovarian cancer.
Okay. And you've been working on it for how many years?
In total, about 15.
Okay. A total of 15 years. So, but you had to switch in mid-gear. You were going down this path, right, Kavitha? You were going down the path.
Yes.
And then you had to kind of switch gears. So tell me what you were trying to figure out initially, and then what you changed to try and come up with a better vaccination.
Sure. So when I came on board, when I joined UofL 6 years ago, John was already trying to figure out what this vaccine does to the immune system. We were using mouse models of cancer. Mm-hmm. We were not ready to go into the humans yet. We are trying to see whether this cancer does the vaccine does what it's supposed to do in various mouse models of solid tumors, like what John mentioned. Mm-hmm. And these are mostly, we started with a mouse model for lung cancer. And my goal was to figure out if the vaccine is actually activating the immune system and to see if the immune system now is armed enough to attack the cancer.
Gotcha.
Our model is mostly a preventive cancer vaccine. That's what we are trying to make this into. Like you would have heard about the smallpox vaccine developed by Jenner century ago. Mm-hmm. And he, like what for most of the vaccines for infectious diseases, they're easy to make and they're successful vaccines. Mainly they're preventive vaccines again. They are successful mainly because the infectious agents that cause the diseases are recognized by the immune system as foreign.
Okay.
But
so the body recognizes
it as foreign.
But
yes.
in cancer, that's not necessarily the case.
That's exactly, you're absolutely right. For a cancer vaccine, to develop a cancer vaccine, it's a lot more complicated because the immune system recognizes, as the cancer grows in the body, the immune system recognizes most of the products that the cancer cells express as self. So the immune system is not attacking the cancer anymore, and it kind of just sits there. Okay. So our goal was, with this vaccine, was to reactivate that immune system. We think that that's possible with our vaccine, which is whole embryonic stem cell vaccine, is because at the time of birth, the immune system looks around and figures out what is self and what is non-self. And in very early in fetal development, the embryos make products, right, that are seen by the immune system mostly as non-self or foreign.
Okay.
So
all right, we're getting a little technical here, and,
yes.
and we're going to have to do that. Let me pull in Chi Lee here for a second, because what is your role, Chi, in all this? So let's pull you in here.
Yeah, what is your role, Chi?
What is your role?
Okay,
have you figured out what your role is,
yes.
Chi? Okay.
So basically, I joined the project a little bit more than 2 years ago because at that time, and Dr. Eaton and Dr. Yaddanapudi's research, they encountered some difficulties. So I use my expertise to overcome certain challenges, and so we can let the project move on.
Your goal and your role in this was to try and make the vaccine simpler.
Yes.
A simpler way to do
Yeah.
it, and cheaper, right?
Yeah,
Potentially cheaper.
So yeah, potentially. It's our goal is to make all-in-one super duper vaccine. So so that's our goal.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a lofty goal.
Yeah, that's
it's a
it.
very lofty
Yeah,
goal,
yeah.
as we know. We're talking with John Eaton, Kavitha, Yaddanapudi, and Chi Li about their work on a potential cancer vaccine that would stop tumors from happening in the body. All right. So right now there's only one true cancer vaccine, and that is for cervical cancer, right? So,
But that's indirect.
which means what?
This vaccine against HPV stops HPV, but the HPV indirectly causes cervical
I got
cancer.
you. So it's a second step
Right,
kind of thing.
right.
Okay. So the one you're working on would be a direct attack.
We hope.
On cancer if it works.
Yeah.
If it works. Okay.
So our vaccine, which consists of the whole embryonic stem cells initial vaccine, and it also has a supercharger of the immune system. So the complication of our vaccine is that we need the whole embryonic stem cells and also the supercharger. And given that we are using embryonic stem cells, they raise ethical and regulatory concerns. They can get onto business by themselves. And making the supercharger is a little bit more cumbersome and complicated process.
Right. But you're not, just to be clear, you're not using embryonic stem cells.
Yes,
are,
we
are
are.
you? You are, but it's not the ones that are controversial. It's the lines that were approved way back
Yes,
when, right?
that's
So,
correct.
just to be clear for everybody listening
yes,
here.
Yes. We use like established cell lines that are available that have been FDA approved to be used in a laboratory scenario.
These come from volunteer
Use
mice.
mice,
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So, you need the embryonic stem cells. You need this supercharger. So how do you get this supercharger? There's something else in that vaccine that you got to deliver it into the body. So explain as simply as you can, like you did with me a few weeks ago, how that happens.
So when we took the initial vaccine part with the supercharger, they were cells basically that expressed this supercharger. So we mixed the whole embryonic stem cells with the other cells that expressed the supercharger and put them together and injected them into the mice. But then we figured out if we had a one-in-one system of a complete vaccine that has all these components and also can avoid that whole cell component, it'll be way easier. Our life would become way easier to get this vaccine to the next level and to take it to the patients.
Right.
So that's where we collaborated with Dr. Chi Li here, and we figured out that we could probably use exosomes that are basically, which Chi will explain to you in a minute, and then put the supercharger within this exosomes and use it as one single unit. And
All right. Well, explain what an exosome is again in as simple a term as you can, Chi. I know
Okay.
it's not easy, but explain
it's-
and why it's important to this
Yeah.
process.
So because as Dr. Yaddanapudi mentioned, a big challenge is to generate these superchargers in embryonic stem cell lines.
To boost the effectiveness of the vaccine.
Yes. So because the embryonic stem cells are known to turn off superchargers and kick them out of cells. And then we have discovered a sneaky way to make embryonic stem cells generate superchargers by themselves through engineering the cells. So the engineered cells then can generate a small membrane fragment which contains superchargers and which has all the biological activity as the whole cell vaccine.
So, John, you've got this idea. You've been working on it with mice and testing it in mice. When might you'd be allowed to do human trials if you get that far.
Probably after I'm dead.
Well, don't say that. We need it sooner than that.
Given the FDA, it might be possible within 2 or 3 years to initiate human trials. And what we do very simply at the outset is just find out if normal humans, incidentally, we're looking for volunteers,
I'm fairly normal.
will have the same response to the vaccine as the mice do, and show an ability of the killing cells in the body to get rid of cancer in a tube. And then beyond that, we were thinking of giving this to people at high risk for cancer. And in Kentucky,
They have a
of
family
course,
history or
Right.
lung cancer, have been smokers all their lives.
Exactly.
Whatever. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So those are the folks you're kind of looking for potentially for the human study if the FDA approves it.
Yep.
So even if the FDA approves it in the next 2 or 3 years, you do the human study, we're talking, what, a decade before you can get this on the market potentially?
For sure.
Okay. And is there anybody else working on something similar to your vaccine? And if so, can you beat them to the punch, or is yours different enough that it's better potentially?
There is a group in Stanford, Dr. Wu's group, who's working on a similar vaccine, but basically taking normal skin cells and forcing them to become stem cells. And they use this as their autologous or the same self kind of a vaccine. So they're not using embryonic stem cells, but they're taking normal skin cells and forcing them to become stem cells.
Okay.
And they pretty much got the same effects, at least in mice, as what we see with our vaccine. But one advantage for us is ours is way cheaper. Personalized vaccine is what they call it, taking the skin cell from the same patient and turning them into stem cells and shooting it back into the patient. That whole process is very cumbersome, time-consuming, and extremely expensive.
Right. And to wrap this up, one thing I think one of you mentioned, maybe John mentioned a little bit earlier, that the effectiveness so far from what you've seen of this vaccine in mice is what percent?
It's between 80 and 100%.
That's really good, obviously.
Yeah.
Well,
Better than the flu vaccine, right?
we'd like to know about the other 20%.
Yeah, that's the one you got to figure out. Okay. Chi Lee, any final thoughts on where this process is headed?
Well, definitely we are heading to correct directions. I would like mention one advantage of our research over Stanford group is we now use the exomes, the membrane fragments, and they are still using the whole cells, whole live cells. So that's the big advantage of our own research.
Because exosomes are easier. Yeah. Okay.
And safer.
And safer and potentially cheaper, right? Yeah. All right. Well, good luck to all of you with this research. I think the world is waiting for yet another cancer vaccine. Maybe the University of Louisville will produce it. That would be awesome.
If we survive the trip back.
If you survive the trip back, that's right. All right. Thank you all for being on the
Mark.
show. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
This next segment is Better Health Together, sponsored by UofL's partners at Passport Health Plan. Passport is a nonprofit managed care organization that's been administering Medicaid benefits to Kentuckians for more than 20 years. And as many of you know, Passport is also investing in West Louisville by building a brand new health campus on the site of the old Philip Morris plant, which is a big deal for the city of Louisville. All right. Do parents of young children get enough information on the safety and health steps they need to take with their kids? Are pediatricians doing a good job informing them? Scott Lajoie is an associate professor in health promotion and behavioral science at the University of Louisville, and he did a little study on that. Scott, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's good. Glad to be here.
All right. So you did a survey of some parents of young children, right? These were parents of, how old were the kids?
Under age 5.
All right. So
Yeah.
parents of kids under age 5, and you asked them what? What'd you want to know?
We asked them a variety of questions about the type of communication that they receive from their pediatrician regarding risk behaviors that their kids might engage in or safety protection interventions that the parents might use. Okay. So we asked them about things like, did they use car seats? Did they practice safe sleep practices? Were they using sunscreen regularly for their children? What about vaccination? Did they get the regular newborn vaccines or flu vaccines?
Stuff you're supposed to do with little kids. Did you lock up the guns in the house?
Did you lock up the guns in the house? Right. Things like that.
All right. So you asked how many parents? It was
about 260 parents.
Okay, and it was an online survey.
It was an online survey collected from around the country. About 80% were Caucasian. Most were mothers responding. Most were college educated. Typical stuff.
No surprise there.
Yeah.
Okay. So what'd you find? What did they say? Did most parents say, yeah, for the most part, I'm doing all these things that I'm supposed to do to protect my little kid?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
For many of the behaviors, they were. We saw the highest adherence were things like vaccination, sunscreen, things like that.
So they're doing vaccines and sunscreen.
Vaccines and sunscreen. Car seats were commonly used correctly, or at least they self-reported correct use.
Right.
Interestingly, we saw that parents didn't hear much discussion about gun safety. In fact, very few did, and that could be a cultural factor. Providers may not think that talking to parents about gun safety is their business to do that. Or
it's a political hot potato,
hot potato, right.
Yeah.
We also found that safe sleeping was the least common reported behavior, of only 20%. It could be an artifact of the various recommendations for safe sleeping, like.
So you don't know who to believe? Parents don't know. Hey, you put the kid on the stomach, put the kid on the back. Don't put pads in the crib. What
exactly? So I think the back to sleep campaign has been very effective. So parents really should have heard the message: put your kid on the back to sleep. Okay. But in terms of putting padding around the crib or having soft toys in the crib, perhaps not.
Okay. And so that was one of the least informed on that one?
About
parents weren't doing it?
About 1 in 5 reported that they followed all the pediatrician's behaviors. And it also includes co-sleeping. And in some cultures, sleeping in the bed with a parent is a common thing. And so that could be an issue as well.
But pediatricians recommend you shouldn't be doing that, right?
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
You also asked about like trampolines, letting your kids on trampolines, those kinds of things. And are most parents pretty good about knowing, don't be a dummy and let your kid go on a trampoline without a net?
Well, there are two things that the pediatricians are not yet recommending, or the American Academy of Pediatrics. And one is talking about trampoline safety, and the other is talking about furniture anchors, both of which are trampoline accidents, for instance, are on the rise.
No surprise there.
Yeah, and then
more trampolines on backyards.
And then furniture anchors, which, if you're not familiar with, anchor your furniture to the wall. So if you have a TV on top of a bureau, the risk of it falling over and injuring a child is pretty high.
Or a bookcase that's a high bookcase or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the kid can pull it over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we found in general was that we asked questions about, do they trust their provider? Do they have comfort? Are they comfortable discussing issues that they have with their provider? Do they agree with these recommendations? And then do they feel confident doing those behaviors? And all of those factors I just listed significantly related to or influenced whether or not parents were adherent.
Gotcha. We're talking with Scott Lajoie, who's an associate professor in health promotion and behavior science at the University of Louisville. We're talking about a study he did asking parents whether they adhere to the guidelines of their pediatricians on keeping their kids safe up to age 5. Yeah. This segment is sponsored by Better Health Together, sponsored by UofL's partners at Passport Health Plan. And when you talk to them about what did your doctor say to you about these different things, did you find that most parents weren't getting any information about anything other than maybe vaccines from the doctors, or were they getting were some doctors giving a whole plethora of stuff, sitting in there for 20 minutes with a parent saying, here are all the things you should be doing because your kid's 4 years old?
I think you're hitting on the issue. The big issue is that pediatricians have a short period of time with the parents. Parents often have issues that they want to raise, like developmental issues with their kid. And so the providers often rely on checklists where they say, maybe the nurse goes through this checklist or the pediatrician quickly goes through it. Are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And then if the parent says yes, then they move on to the next. If the parent says no, the provider says, okay, you should be doing this. And so there's some potential concerns about self-reporting. How many parents are going to say, I don't put my kid in a car seat if the pediatrician asks, right? Even if they don't, they're going to.
Right. And since this was an online survey, it's not a scientifically done survey, so you don't really know. You don't have you kind of have people that are willing to take the time to fill out the survey. You don't have everybody as if you picked up the phone and called them, right?
Right. It's it was a self sample. The demographics of the sample were representative of the country in general. We had a wide variety of respondents, so we feel pretty comfortable that the results are somewhat generalizable to a broader population.
Okay.
But the specific values, the magnitude of the effects that we saw, I would say, aren't that informative, but the direction was.
Right.
So the more you trusted your doctor, the more likely you were to listen. The more you felt comfortable doing things like installing a car seat correctly, the more likely you were to do it. Things like that.
Right. Again, we're talking with Scott Lajoie from the University of Louisville. He's an associate professor in health promotion and behavioral science. And this segment is sponsored by Passport Health Plan. And I guess the bottom line question here before we move on to talking about your Fulbright is to parents, what is the message out of this to parents? What should we know? What should parents know that have little kids?
Well, your pediatrician has a wealth of information to maximize the chances that your kid stays safe. Things like very simple behaviors that you can do. And it's important for the parents to take ownership of asking the provider, what can I do to make my kid safer? Right? And we generally do that. But if you're not comfortable talking to your doctor, if your doctor doesn't elicit that information and you have to be proactive with it, there are websites that parents can go to get information to come to the meeting or the appointment more informed, more empowered.
And what's the message to doctors and pediatricians?
Go with what your patient is saying. You'll want to provide basic information, but look to see how your patient's reacting. Are they just giving you yes/no answers, or are they engaged in the conversation? Can you elicit more information from them? Can you try and identify what their values are with respect to keeping their kids safe? Right, things like that.
Very good. All right. Well, you are a big shot, Scott, because you won a faculty Fulbright scholarship, right, to Romania?
I did, yes.
That's a big deal, isn't it? Tell people what a Fulbright is, first off.
So a Fulbright is an award that's given by the State Department, U.S. State Department, that places researchers or educators in different countries where there's a specific need and the faculty member meets that need. Okay, so for example, you can do a 6-month Fulbright, you can do a full year Fulbright, or you can do what I did, which is called a specialist. And it's a 1-month Fulbright, and you can do it up to 5 times over 5 years.
And it's paid for.
Paid for, yep.
It's all paid for. You didn't spend a dime. All right. So where'd you go and what'd you do?
So I went to Romania, and a city in Romania called Cluj. And I was at the University of Cluj School of Public Health there. And I was working with their oncology institute to address cervical cancer prevention.
Okay. And so what do they know about cervical cancer prevention in Romania, in Cluj, Romania?
In Cluj, Romania. Well, what we do know is that Romania has the highest rates of cervical cancer in the European Union. We also know that they have the lowest screening rates, PAP testing and HPV testing, and that there's no HPV vaccination campaign, which there's evidence suggests is effective at preventing cervical cancer. So Cluj is or Romania in general is a very interesting case in terms of they have a high need. There's low information among women throughout the country, and it's particularly problematic in rural areas of the community, of the country.
And so your project, as part of your Fulbright, was to do what?
So we wanted to know what women know about PAP testing, what they know about cervical cancer in general. We wanted to know what their attitudes were towards their provider. We wanted to elicit information about their awareness of different methods for staying healthy.
And did they even know there was an HPV vaccine? bless these women?
So Romania tried to implement an HPV vaccine campaign about 10 years ago, and they did a really poor job. They didn't inform anybody that they were doing it. They just showed up and they said, here, we're going to stick you with this needle and prevent HPV. And so there was a very, very low uptake. And so they scrapped it. They haven't tried to do it again. So Romania's biggest focus has been on Pap testing.
Mm-hmm. And they're not doing that well either, are they?
They're
not,
not.
What you said?
They're not doing it very well, and it's a problem in part because Romania has several different insurance programs. It has a national insurance program, kind of like a socialized medicine thing. Then it has private insurance. And ideally, or theoretically, the Pap testing is free. Mm-hmm. If you have an abnormal result on your Pap test, the diagnosis you pay for. And if
which is not the case here in the United States.
Which is not the case here. And then if you end up with cancer, if you have cancer, they pay for the treatment.
Okay.
Right. So there's this.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So there's kind of this gap in the middle about diagnosis, but there's a lot of uncertainty as to who needs Pap testing and when and where.
Okay. Well, Scott Lajoie, Fulbright scholar, faculty Fulbright scholar. What did you bring back from Romania that you can apply to your job at the University of Louisville?
The one of the interesting things when I arrived in Romania, I had this. I had my research idea all planned out. I knew what I wanted to do. And, of course, the minute I get there, I start talking with a provider, and she tells me that women who are waiting to get their Pap tests tell each other all these horror stories about how bad cancer is, about how awful the Pap testing process is, the anxiety. They really amplify the stories that they have, and that influences the patient's perception of risk and harm and things like that.
Kind of like colonoscopies in the United States. Everybody talks about how horrible they are. I got you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, that's a perfect example. So we decided that we would gather patient health narratives. So patient stories about their experience with Pap testing, their experiences with an abnormal result, or with treatment for cervical cancer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we need to wrap this up. So,
okay.
so what's the bottom line for what? How
the bottom line is the data is still being collected. Right,
Okay.
1 month is a short period of time, but there's the take-home message to Kentucky is that we need to understand what patients are hearing from their peers and how that's influencing their perceptions about treatments for or screening for cancer.
And so there's this underground talking network going on. Oh, it's really bad. And,
Yes.
Okay. And that may be going on in Kentucky just like it's going on in Romania.
Precisely.
I got you. All right. Scott Lajoie, always good talking to you. Welcome home.
Thank you so
Welcome
much.
back.
Glad to be
All
back.
right. That'll about do it for this edition of UofL Today with Mark Hebert, which you can hear every Monday and Tuesday night at 6 on 93.9 The Ville. You can also listen to the podcast of the shows on SoundCloud or watch some of the programs on Metro TV or KETKY throughout the week. Check out all the UofL news, videos, and events at UofLnews.com. That's UofLnews.com. Thanks for listening to UofL Today with Mark Hebert, and go Cards.